what is it that you wanted to dive into today?
Today we were planning, I think, to debate whether or not taxation is theft, and
Hmm.
then tease into whether or not government is moral. I haven't done any research on this, so I'm going to be attempting to steelman an argument that was supposed to be given to me yesterday. And then my hope is that you can either tear it down or present a counter position as we're going.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I definitely don't have I guess a counter position that I've already staked out so much as I think the idea that taxation is theft is like this is like a libertarian kind of like fundamental idea. And I find libertarianism to be ultimately cringe. It's like communism for country people. And as a country person, I hear and see a lot of libertarianism. These sort of like, I would call them kind of brain dead ideologies. They're everywhere around me. I see them and hear them constantly, and I feel like you can just you can pull one little thing out, and the whole Jenga tower falls apart. So this should be pretty easy for me, I think. Hopefully, unless you know something I don't.
So I mean, I don't even know what libertarianism actually is. So it sounds like you might know more about this than I do.
Maybe.
My hope was to approach this kind of more from a moral perspective, so more like feeling whether or not it's good, wrong, right, bad, and try to dissect why somebody might feel this way and push that direction. Starting out, I would maybe present this to you. Uh, I think the first thing that would come to mind for me when it comes to taxation, there's kind of two directions that we could go. One is whether or not you can consent to participating in society. When you're paying taxes, the idea is that you're contributing part of your income to the social cause or maybe the majority cause in some sense, and it's kind of related, I guess, in some way to whether or not democracy is moral. And the other direction that I think this can go in is kind of about the nature of ownership, in the sense that if I put money towards something, let's say like a park, roads, something like this, do I own part of it, and whether or not the government, which I like exist in their land in some way, whether or not the government has the moral right to charge me for living on their land. In say for example a case where I somehow am able to fully avoid all publicly funded facilities. So I think these are the two kind of directions I would push in. I'm not sure if this is like the mainstream argument or if there's like more to the mainstream argument. So if you don't mind, do you want to start with the first one about like whether or not a person can like give consent to participating in a government or participating in like a society essentially?
Yeah, so I don't really have like a strong, uh, like technical, I guess, vocabulary to explain my positions here. But just to be as like, just for the sake of making sense, I'm going to try to use like really plain language here. So whenever you're born into a society, you can't consent to that. You can't consent to being born in the first place. You can't consent to being born where you're born. You can't consent to being raised where you're raised. Once you reach the age of majority, that's when, at least in America, you have the opportunity of going outside of what other people have prescribed for you and kind of striking out on your own and going where you want and doing what you want. I think you'll find, unless there's some exception I'm unaware of, there's no place on earth you can go and have zero expectation that you would need to pay some sort of taxes, be it an income tax or some sort of property taxes or sales taxes, things like this, uh, in order to contribute to sort of keeping the society in question moving forward. If people aren't being taxed, if there isn't some sort of pool to draw from in order to pay for really basic stuff that virtually everyone uh, takes advantage of, like roads, then how would these things be built? How would they be upkept? If you aren't paying some amount of money for your electricity or for your water or for your garbage man, how would these things exist in the first place? So, without like moralizing and saying you need to contribute to the greater good or contribute to the welfare of other people, which I think you can actually make a pretty strong argument that taxation for the purpose of paying for other people's food or utilities is theft. I would agree to that to some extent. The idea that you shouldn't be expected to chip in a little bit to take care of the roads where you use to commute, or you use to go visit people, or you use to have things delivered to you, is kind of preposterous. It's kind of I would almost go as far as to say petulant to argue that you shouldn't have to contribute to the roads.
So do you feel that it's moral to would you feel it's moral to like force acceptance of something that the public wants onto somebody that may not want it?
It depends on what the thing is, I suppose. If it's something that you don't stand to gain from in any way, or you don't actually utilize that particular thing that you're contributing to, then absolutely you have a case, I think. Yeah.
So if that's the case, how can you argue that a person who, as you said, there aren't any countries in the world where you can like go and there's no taxation, there's no sales tax or anything like this. Nobody has the option. How can you say that it's moral to force them to make the decision? Like you have to use these roads, you have to use like our water system, you have to do all of these things. What if a person, is like, I don't know, I don't really want to use your water system, your electricity, well, I think electricity is more like private, but like could be private, but like not your healthcare, for example. Well, that's also private. Not your let's roads. Like I'm not really coming up with good ideas here for examples, but not the societies paid for parks and public spaces, libraries, or whatever.
Well, so okay, I guess the whole thing is here, like, I think we're ignoring or forgetting that someone actually can choose to exist outside of society, at least in America. You can literally just take whatever you have and go to some sort of wilderness area and just live in the woods and live off the land and build a little hut somewhere. There's not going to be any sort of like uh, completely. So there's not going to be land anywhere where you have like 1,000% expectation that no one would ever come and try to make you move, or sue you to leave their property, or I don't know, maybe shoot you for being on their property. But if you want to choose a lifestyle wherein you're just subsisting off the sweat of your brow, then you can do that. And nobody has any expectations they're gonna be taxing some guy who lives in the woods. If you want to be a hermit, or if you want to be, uh, you know, if you're actually not living in a home at an address, if you're actually just living off the land, then you can't actually be taxed. You can't actually be expected to contribute to society in any meaningful way. And if you're gone for a certain period of time, you will be considered to be, functionally dead as far as the government's concerned. So you do absolutely have that option.
So is it the case that I don't know if this is like so let me say this first. I don't know if this is actually the direction this argument is intended to go in,
Hmm.
but just to like exhaust it potentially, is it actually the case that if you lived in like the mountains that you're not expected to, like by yourself or in like the wilderness or something, you're not actually expected to pay taxes. It feels like every plot of land or something you'd have to pay like property taxes in some way, or you might have to pay as long as you're in some way benefiting like in an income sense. Like here's an example. What if you lived in the mountains and you somehow navigated your way to a job that wasn't in the mountains without using any roads that were publicly funded, without relying on any, like, I don't know, water fountains or anything like this. You somehow made it to work and you worked at this facility that's paying you money to I don't know, complete some tasks, and you go back home every single day without touching anything that is publicly funded by taxes. Do you feel like that person in that case like would not be like, it seems like I feel like that person would still be expected to pay income tax, right?
No, no. If you aren't actually making an income, and the person paying you isn't recording that they're paying you, then no, nobody would know you're making an income.
Well, no, like I mean, assuming the business is operating like properly, they would have to record that they're paying somebody that is living in the mountains.
Yeah, so I would say, like, by virtue of being on the books, by virtue of being on the grid, you're enjoying some of the benefits of being a member of American society, and therefore you're going to be expected to contribute to it in some way.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, like the business itself is somehow benefiting, and then you're like indirectly benefiting from working for a business that could exist, or even just being able to make transactions with the society itself means you're somehow benefiting. Sure.
Right, and the fact that you're gaining an income, which, if you're just living in the woods, subsisting on your own, the sweat of your brow, if everything you have is something that you literally, made for yourself or found for yourself or killed or whatever, like, what do you need money for? Why are you out here gaining an income? What do you intend to exchange these funds for? And how are you going to get them without, things having been shipped around, things having touched the roads, things having flown or went through customs, and therefore, Customs and Border Patrol takes a lot. I mean, that requires money. FAA requires money. So if you're buying things that have been flown or shipped and they've came through borders, then you necessarily have benefited from the United States infrastructure.
So, what if that option didn't exist? Like, what if it wasn't possible to live in the wilderness, like by yourself? Like somehow, I don't know, maybe if you like did set up a camp or a house or something in the wilderness, eventually the state or something would come find you and be like, oh, you're actually using our land. You have to pay like property tax, or you have to pay I don't know, tree tax or something, like wildlife animal tax for not, or like even farming tax or something if you're trying to be a vegetarian. If that's the case and there's like no options, you can't, there's no like foreign countries you could reach because you can't use any public transportation, you can't fly anywhere, you there's just like no options. Like in that case, would you still consider it like a situation where your consent was like morally acquired?
So, well, I guess we would have to acknowledge that you're impinging upon someone else's ability or inability to consent whenever you're kind of putting yourself on their property, right? So if you're living on public land, that technically means that it's something that's under the purview of local or federal government, and therefore is like maintained or exists because of American taxpayers or local taxpayers. So I guess the expectation that you would be able to remain there indefinitely without any sort of incursion upon your little place you've carved out is probably fanciful to some extent. I think that you could probably pretty easily and I don't know if I can actually make this argument like from a moral perspective, but or even a rational perspective, but I think that you could probably if you're in the woods somewhere and somebody approaches you and says, "Hey, this is my property," and you said, "Hey, I appreciate that, and I've been respectful of your land, and I will continue to be if you allow me to continue to be here." This sounds stupid, but I honestly think that most people would actually just be like, "Fucking whatever," you know? If you're in the actual woods somewhere, I don't mean like you're in a little patch of trees in somebody's backyard, but like if you're in the actual wilderness, right? I can't imagine a scenario in which anyone would actually care,
Yeah,
right?
maybe not like in real life. It might not happen that anybody would care, but I think the like moral consideration is whether or not, because you essentially have like no ability to make any other decision, whether or not
Hmm.
forcing that decision on somebody could be somehow be considered moral. There's like another half of this direction, I would say, that's more in line with what you're talking about like ownership and property and stuff like this. But I'm hoping to like exhaust this branch first, even though I'm not sure this is like where the intended like direction is supposed to go for this argument. Is like if you can't make an example of this could be this is like let's say you're born into a society where like everybody, the doctor just immediately gives you like a circumcision or something as soon as you're born, and you as a baby you don't have any ability to stop this from happening. And I don't know, maybe like the society thinks that the foreskins or something are like evil and this is going to cause massive panic. Do you feel like it would be moral to like force that circumcision onto the baby? Like anywhere on the planet that you would go, in this like hypothetical planet, you would always, like, doesn't matter where you're born, you can't like transfer to a hospital in a different country where they wouldn't do this.
You're saying like as a parent, would it be moral to consent to your baby being circumcised, or as like are you saying that are you asking if the baby should have some sort of expectation of being able to make a choice?
No, is it moral for the society to like push this kind of like decision or policy, I guess, onto beings that like can't consent, and there's no option there's no alternatives for like a parent or like the child themselves to make to have like an alternate outcome, because it feels like too coercive in some sense, right? Like, or if you're born, you're like forced to like lose an arm or something, right? Or if you're born, you're
Hmm.
forced to dye your hair or like pigment your scalp so that your hair like turns pink no matter what. Any sort of decision where you're kind of you're enforcing something where there's no alternative, and like,
There's no going back.
yeah, there's no going back in some way.
Yeah, well, like if they put a brand on you at birth or something like this.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Like, no, there's no, as soon as you're in the system for taxation, or like in the government's eyes, there's not like, you can't really withdraw from that unless you fake your death or something that's kind of extreme. So it has a similar kind of like permanence, I guess.
yeah.
And then the
With the
other,
taxation thing, it's quite a bit different because it's like if you actually quit earning income and you don't have any property to tax, like if you aren't a part of the system, they don't tax you. They can't. There's nothing to tax, right?
yeah, but that, I mean, I feel like that brings in another whole like moral issue, which is whether or not you're allowed to like that almost seems like you're now affecting a person's like opportunities, right? Like it
True,
feels
of
like it would be
course.
clearly immoral to for the government to leverage control over your opportunities in order to enforce like some other decision on you, which is participation in society.
So like the way I think of it is like imagine if are you using OBS right now?
Yes.
So OBS is like open source software. You have the expectation that you can use OBS completely for free. You can use it to make money even, and OBS is never going to reach out to you and say, "Hey, we were letting you use it without paying up front, but now we've come to a place where we need to start recouping some of the investment we put into developing this software." And if you read the fine print, you would see that we at any time retain the right to start charging you for use of our software, including retroactively as well. So any sort of income that you've gained from the use of the software, we're entitled to 20% of it or something like this. You would say this is, you've been kind of like duped into this, and you've been kind of fucked over, and there would be like a big class action lawsuit, and they would win in America at least, right? Well, actually, I guess it depends on how the language is on the terms of service. But generally, I think that you would probably get away with not having to pay them. But then also there would come this place where it's like, now that they've told you have to start paying, there would be this delineation where you would want to stop using it or decide to start paying them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but I would say that this analogy is a little bit different because in the taxation case, it's like directly affecting your capacity to like stay alive. Whereas I think with OBS, there's so many alternate, not specifically with like streaming, but there's so many alternate things that would allow a person to sustain themselves that doesn't require OBS. Like when it comes to the necessities, that it wouldn't be at least morally considered at the same level.
I guess I really strongly disagree with that, because I think that if if you say that being able to stay alive means being able to earn an income and enjoy the product of other people's labor, like being able to exchange your labor for money, which you can then use to exchange that for food or exchange that for shelter, then you're necessarily benefiting from structures that were put in place, refined over time, and are now at this state where you can actually have a super easy life relative to everyone, in history. Like if you go back like 50, 60 years, and then all human existence prior to that, I don't think anybody would argue that the life they had back then was less challenging. I don't think anyone would say their lives were less challenging than ours are now. Like it was harder to subsist back then than it is now. So you being able to benefit from this society and being expected to contribute to it, like you obviously can't consent to being born again. Like I would keep going back to that. Like you can't consent to being born, and if you don't like it, what are you going to do about it? You're going to kill yourself? That's, whether that's your right or not. I would say you're absolutely within what's the word I'm looking for here? I would say it is a moral decision to kill yourself if the reason you're killing yourself is because you didn't consent to being alive, and you just can't find any other way to square that circle. I would say it's stupid that you're throwing this away. Your one opportunity to experience anything. But I think that's a choice that people should be allowed to make.
So that's kind of
And
interesting because I think like so I was at least initially I was thinking kind of down the same line. This is not well thought out at all. So there might definitely be some holes here, but it kind of falls into the similar like eugenics or like antenatal type of position where you're actually affecting these you're affecting decisions that or you're like considering the morals of decisions that are being applied in scenarios where whether or not like something can be considered an agent and be granted like consideration for making decisions. And like if you're and I guess this also kind of brings us back to the abortion case, but if you're if you're a baby and or you're like pre a baby, do you weigh the autonomy of the mother over the autonomy of a potential human being? And it feels like at least from my side, I think it would be you would kind of weigh the potential of like actual people over potential people.
So, I mean, I guess I could kind of go in that direction and say like, is do you feel like when you're born you are entitled to anything? Do you feel like there's such a thing as a like a universal human right? Do you feel like there's anything that you should have an expectation that society provide for you apropos of any sort of effort on your part?
Um, yeah, I do believe that that should be the case. If you're talking about like relative to society, yes, because I
Hmm.
believe that there should like kind of ingrained in the notion of society, there should be some like objective standards about how people treat each other in the society. Otherwise, it's just equivalent to not having society.
So if society ought to be expected to provide a certain level of maybe subsistence isn't the right word to use here, but
I wouldn't say
if society,
subsistence, maybe
okay,
like moral consideration in some way.
okay, fair. So let's say if society is expected to give some degree of moral consideration to somebody merely because they exist, then I would say that you ought to grant society similar moral consideration. You ought to feel like you owe society something as well.
But that's only in the case that you decide to be part of society. So if it's the case, like let's say in this route, maybe you could argue that, let's say like immediately after you're born, somehow you're born with like full adult comprehension and like ability to consent to things, and you decide like no, I don't want to participate in society. You're you're now like external to the moral considerations that society would grant to other members in the society. I guess you could argue that like maybe the yeah, the society then has the right to just like murder you like on the spot and be like, oh, this is a piece of trash, like toss it away.
If you continue to exist within the society while choosing not to participate in the ways that you want to, you're basically I would say a parasite, and I mean that literally, not in some sort of like moralistic sense. Like you're there, you're draining resources, you're not creating, you're not contributing. Um, Now, I'm not somebody who, just to be super clear, I don't think that people who take on this sort of like what's the word I want to look for here? Just because someone is a parasite doesn't mean that I would want them to be killed, right?
Hmm.
I don't want somebody to be like excised from society because they don't want to contribute in some sort of meaningful way. It's not really out of compassion necessarily. It's more out of like there may be reasons that they're unable to contribute to society. Maybe they didn't choose this, and maybe if they did choose it, they chose it based on bad information. Maybe it's society's fault that they aren't able to meaningfully contribute to society. So like things like this are what I would take into consideration before I would say that there should be no sort of welfare programs, right? And I think that there are times when somebody actually needs help getting to a place where they can actually contribute to society. Not everyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps or whatever.
Hmm.
So, the degree to which I would approve of these of programs uh, to ensure people's welfare, it's if I were the king of the world, it would probably be lower than what we have in America right now, but not much more. I think we do a pretty good job of kind of striking a balance there. But again, every time we go down the path of what sort of consideration should society give to people who can't contribute or who don't want to contribute, I think we have to like take we have to take that and apply an equal amount of weight to, well, if you don't want to participate in society, what makes you feel like you have a right to benefit from it, right?
Like to break my own position here, I think the counter argument work. I think most people that would be like, unless you do you believe that there are like objective outside of any person's consideration, like human morals that should exist, like outside of society,
No.
outside of any systems? Like, do you believe that there exists just
You mean like in a prehistoric sense, like before we had civilization, before we had language, when we were effectively animals, right?
yeah, like do you believe like people shouldn't murder each other regardless of, whether or not they're in the same society, or even if they're from like the same planet or something, like do you feel like that's like that's a truth that should exist in across all human beings no matter what?
I think that the reason we ought not murder each other now is because we exist in a society together, or because we live in societies adjacent to each other. Because we have the capacity to cooperate, it is immoral not to the
Right.
extent that we can,
And I think like
without
the
yeah.
I think the counter argument that like breaks this position, at least from this angle, is I feel like most people that would say like, oh, I would want the ability to make a decision as to whether or not I'd participate in the society. I think the follow up would be, well, okay, if you decide not to participate in the society, would you also be okay with that society just like murdering you on the spot, like with moral, like while being in the moral good, or moral right even to do that? And I think most people would be like, no, I don't feel like I would want people to murder me if I decided not to participate in the society. But do you kind of see what I mean? Like that would contradict essentially having the right to make that decision, because it kind of goes into what you're talking about, which is that if you're not participating in society, why should society grant you any consideration?
Well, I guess the reason I disagree is because I don't imagine that the person who chooses not to exist in society is existing in society. There's no one to murder you if you're not in the society with those people.
Yeah, or
If
like
you
at the very least, like there's no, I don't think the society itself should have any obligation to grant you the same considerations that they grant people that are in the society.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, but like, should we go outside of society and find you where you are, just minding your own business and existing in your own little universe and kill you? No, that's fucking evil.
Right, right, but like I don't think that that's like I'm not so much like saying like we should do that as much as like whether or not, because I'm trying to keep this to like the moral realm. It's like whether or not
Hmm.
it's morally right or wrong. Essentially, that's like what the distinction I'm hoping to get at eventually by like doing this like bad faith debate.
I understand, but like, so I guess I'm just saying like, if you are in society and you're like standing on a street corner in some city with a sign that's like "fuck society, I want nothing to do with society," and you go talk to the guy and you're like, "Hey man, what's this about? What do you mean? I want to try and like come around to your way of seeing things," and the guy's just like, "I shouldn't have to pay taxes. I shouldn't have to blah 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 blah. I shouldn't have to play by the rules. I shouldn't have to follow the same laws everyone else does." I would say like, cool story, bro. Like I think you're allowed to feel that way, and I think as long as you like accidentally don't break any sort of laws that impinge upon other people's freedom, I don't care. Like you can keep being a weirdo. We have freedom of speech here. You can stand here and yell at people all you want. I don't care. But as soon as the guy decides that he has his own like he has his own ideal society in his head, and he's going to try and like map that onto his reality, in a reality in which he is coexisting with us, and then he wants to start like crapping on street corners or start grabbing people's asses or something like this. Then that's when you bring the hammer down on him. That's when you remind him that he is existing in our society, right? And he's trying to say he doesn't have to contribute in any meaningful way. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you can get away with it. But if you aren't following society's rules, if you're trying to create your own order here, then that's not going to work. And I think we are within. I think it's our moral obligation at that point to enforce the rules that we've all decided to live by upon that person.
Right. Suppose now I am a member of society. I've like, because I'm not willing to say that it's okay to not be granted the some basic considerations. Now let's say like I am part of society. The next question would be, what if your taxes are being utilized in ways that you don't think makes any sense.
Yeah, so this I think you can actually make really strong arguments about, and I would probably agree with a lot of them. Like I don't like public schools, for example. I would love to reform the education system in America such that if you didn't want to contribute to public schools, you didn't have to. I don't want to like abolish public schools, but if I don't have kids, and you know, assuming that I do have kids one day, which I would like to, I intend to homeschool my kids, or conceivably send them to a private school. I would probably want to send them to a private school later, but I would absolutely not want to have anything to do with public schools. And if I did, then you know I would start contributing to them at that point. So I don't like people being sort of like indoctrinated in ways that are immoral to me, and I don't want to pay for other people to be indoctrinated. Does that make sense?
So does that mean that you'd feel some amount of taxation is actually theft?
I would say a lot of taxation could absolutely be considered theft. Whether or not it is, I mean, I guess that's a totally different conversation. Would I feel as if I'm being like stolen from in order to contribute to these schools? Uh, it, yeah, I do. I absolutely do, if I'm being completely honest.
Right.
So, however, I am existing in this society, and this society has decided that this is for the greater good. And I think the moral thing for me to do is to try to move things in the direction that I find to be more moral, rather than bitch about having an immoral action committed upon me. So I would say that it's like a moot point that that I'm being robbed via taxation at this
Interesting.
point.
Do you want to switch positions here? Because I have counter arguments to my argument, and I'd be
Sure,
curious how you counter argue this.
I'll try.
So let's say you feel that taxation is theft, and I'd ask you the following: do you feel like a Netflix subscription is like immoral? Like the design of a Netflix subscription is immoral?
In some ways, absolutely it is. Yeah. A Netflix subscription, basically, you're being you exist in a system where if you want to enjoy certain types of content, then it's locked into this ecosystem whereby contributing to it necessarily causes other people to have to sort of work under like a monopolistic system.
Sorry,
Does that
not
make
in
sense?
that direction. I mean, like for the person that's paying. So, or like let's say like a Twitch subscription, right? If I subscribe to SirWarmups on Twitch, and I think the way this works, to correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not at the point where I've experienced this yet, but I believe like you pay a monthly fee or something like this, and the money kind of gets split between Twitch and the creator.
Right.
If I pay that money under the pretense that I really enjoy Sir Warmups's. Do you play like Call of Duty or something, or like is there a game that you play? I remember seeing a shooter on your channel
Oh yeah,
before.
I've played different. I'm not like I don't define my channel by any particular game. Like I played Halo for a while.
Halo. Do you play League of Legends or anything?
No, the only thing I played lately is Beat Saber.
Beat Saber. Okay, let's say like I subscribe to Sir Warmups's channel for Beat Saber, but you start playing League of Legends or Call of Duty or something.
Sure.
But you still also create Beat Saber content, and which is what I'm subscribed for. Part of my subscription is being utilized by you to sustain yourself to create content that I'm not really paying for. Do you feel that that aspect of the transaction is immoral?
Absolutely. Well, hang on. It's not. It's absolutely immoral. So I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. You're saying like if I subscribe to you with the expectation that I'm going to be getting uh, the same type of content that I've experienced so far, and then you change the type of content you're making, and I've already I've already paid for this other stuff. I basically like pre-ordered something that I didn't get, right?
Yeah, or like I pay for Netflix. I don't actually use Netflix, but if I paid for Netflix, maybe I only watch anime on Netflix.
Hmm.
But the subscription fee that I'm paying is like designed to, it's for like everything. Like maybe there's I don't know, American dramas or something, right? That I would never watch, but I'm still like kind of paying, or I'm like putting money into it that would pay for those types of things, at least at the
Right.
company level. Yeah.
I would say that you should ideally do the math before you contribute money to something, before you exchange your labor for the product of someone else's labor. You should consider whether or not it's going to be worth it to you to do so.
Well, what if
So
like
if
you
you,
already paid? Like so in the taxation case, just to like try to bring this back, the idea is that
Mhm.
like I'm subscribed to the system. I'm not so much subscribed to like expenditures specifically by the system. And because of that, I don't find taxation immoral because I'm subscribed to like the system of the government and not so much that the government is spending my dollars specifically towards like say roads, which I enjoy and I'm in favor of expenditures towards, but in comparison to say I don't know, like I think you were saying like public schools in some way. Like I'm not in favor of how they're spending the money for public schools, but to me, it's still fine. I don't think that that's theft because the thing that I'm actually paying for is kind of like a subscription to the system as opposed to like specifically roads.
Right. So my whole thing is, I think capitalism is like, or I guess we would say laissez-faire capitalism, which we don't really have, would be like the ultimate expression of democracy, right? Like you contribute to things that you believe in or that you enjoy. You're voting with your wallet, effectively, right? So if people want things and they contribute toward things, that necessarily means that people find value in the thing more than they find value in retaining their money or spending their money on something else. So if people are spending all this money on Netflix, then I think it stands to reason that these people have decided that it's a worthwhile expenditure. So I think a lot of people get into it not knowing what they're getting into, and I think that like caveat emptor. I don't know how to pronounce Latin words, but buyer beware, right? Like there's an expectation that you are considering your options to the extent that you're capable before you spend your money. And there's certain consumer protections in place if you buy lemon cars, for example, or if you contribute to some sort of like scammer. In certain circumstances, you can get your money back from these things, or you can sue them to try and get your money back. But we're going to get into like marketing and all this other sort of sleazy shit, I guess, if we go too far down this path. But
Yeah, I get, but also like in this case, like with government, you're kind of like forced to pay for government already. Like you've already made the purchase. The consideration now is whether or not the like system of taxation is moral. So like I've already agreed to buy it. I don't have any other choice essentially, and
you do have a choice.
well the alternative is to not be part of society, which we kind of already like dealt with.
You take the good with the bad, or you don't, right?
Right, right. But like so in the case that we're currently considering, you're like okay, I'm in line with society. I'm part of society now, and the argument is like so I'm paying taxes, right? Part of my
Hmm.
taxes are going towards things that people decided like societally to spend money on. There's this there's this notion that democracy is moral, and this is the reason why the way that the money is being spent, regardless if I think it's correct or not, it's like good, like good morally speaking, because everybody wants to do this, right?
Right.
But the notion of whether or not it's theft is kind of like at an individual level, like you're taking money from me, and I'm not like consenting to give you that money.
Hmm.
So
So if we're using theft in a more like if we're being like stricter with our definition of theft, then no, my money isn't being stolen to pay for schools.
okay.
When I said theft in that scenario, I guess what I meant was I feel like I don't have a choice whether or not I'm paying for something that I don't want to pay for. But the choice I have is to not exist in society. So I choose that over not having that money taken from me. I weigh the pros and cons, and it's not that hard for me to decide to keep living in society, and it makes more sense to me that I should advocate for the things I like and against the things I don't. And if a certain threshold is reached, then society moves more in the direction I want.
Oh, I see. So you're saying essentially because you have the right to vote, that it is not considered theft because the right to vote is like that the ability to influence the direction of the system while simultaneously being like subscribed to it is like sufficient for you to not feel that it's theft.
Voting's a big part of it, but also being able to influence other people and their votes as well, I think is super important.
So what if I propose this to you? Do you feel democracy is moral?
Ultimately, yes, but I believe there are injustices that exist in a democratic system, and in any system. I mean,
So what if it's the case that democratic decisions are on average usually bad? Like the controversial ones at least.
so like you're saying like if we kind of find ourselves in a situation where it's not really a democracy so much as it's a mob rule type of
No, no, no. It's just
scenario.
like it's just by nature of people. So, like
Well, I think if
most.
the average person wants something, then it's not actually bad. It's just bad for me if I disagree.
But what about this? So, kind of definitionally speaking, like half of the people are stupid, right?
Sure.
And a lot, like especially when it comes to decisions that are being applied at like a societal level, these tend to be really complicated decisions. So most people, I would argue, don't have the intelligence to really properly understand like how to make these decisions. In a democratic system, that would mean that, like a purely democratic system, that would mean that almost all of the time when it comes to decisions that are hard to make, the like stupid decision is actually being materialized as the one that society decides to take. And do you feel then that it's moral to be like forced to subject yourself to this very likely stupid decision?
Yes, I do.
You do think so?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Could you explain that?
because yeah, so it's because I also exist in the system. I have the same baseline level of influence as all the stupid people do. Yet I also have the capacity to, uh, and the degree to which I have the capacity and the ability to do this is going to vary on, you know, I have to restructure this. If I don't like it, I feel like I have a moral obligation to push back against it in the most effective way I can and try to affect positive change. So it's like the injustice is like baked into the system, and and the thing that I ought do is try to ameliorate that. And if I can't, then I don't really feel like I have the moral high ground. I feel like if the thing that I want the society disagrees with actually loses, then it doesn't matter if I was morally correct or not. Does that make sense?
Um,
It's like a I'm not trying to like cheat code my way out of like answering your question, but it's like morals don't matter when you're dead, right? If you can't have this conversation, there's no morals as far as your existence is concerned. You're no longer a moral agent when you're dead. And
sure.
if you can't exist within society, if you can't if you can't put yourself in a position to be able to have these sorts of conversations, then it's a moot point. It's like, the tree falls, no one's around to hear it. Did it make a sound?
Well,
And I would say the
I
answer
guess
is it
like
doesn't matter.
I guess my question here is like, do you feel that it is moral for you to be held responsible for decisions that are being made by a bunch of other people that potentially have no idea what they're talking about? Or like not potentially, like in many cases just actually don't have any idea what they're talking about. Like you're being held
Fundam-
responsible for, let's say for example society decides like democratically that we are going to build a 7,000-foot statue of I don't know, Joe Biden or something in Montana, and we decide like we're going to spend all of our money doing this because it is the greatest thing that has ever glanced the minds of the American public. Do you feel that it's moral for you to be held responsible for that type of decision?
yes, absolutely.
You do feel it is. Okay, could you explain why you feel that that would be okay?
Because I've contributed to the perpetuation of a society in which this brain dead idea came into the collective consciousness and was somehow voted into reality.
I see. So you're saying that the fact that you have agency in influencing the system means that you're somehow responsible before this responsibility like is considered.
To the degree everyone else in my position is, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. If you feel that empowered, then I don't know if I can. Yeah, I guess like if you're willing to say yes here, okay.
Like think about this. Like when I voted for Trump, right? I voted for
Sure.
Trump twice. The first time I voted for Trump, it was for a number of reasons, but in my retrospective like rationale for why I did it, like I think about the more sort of like the more moral reasons why I voted for Trump over Hillary Clinton. But at the time, I was much more concerned with just I can't stand Hillary Clinton. I don't want to see her more. I don't want to see the smug look of victory on her face. That's really, believe it or not, the main some of the main things that were going through my head at the time. Um, and also, I think Trump is really funny, and I think seeing him as a president would be like hilarious. So, it
Okay.
a lot of people think that is morally abhorrent. That I would choose to have, that I literally chose to put kind of a jester at the helm of our country, rather than someone who's arguably the most qualified person to be president ever, who's ran for the office. And I would say, maybe you're right, maybe you're right, but you also have to consider the conditions that we live in at the time, and and the simple fact that Trump was even able to run for president and have any sort of support says a lot about people like Hillary Clinton and the expectations they have of our society. So I would say everyone who made fun of Trump and made fun of Trump supporters is every bit as responsible for him being elected to office as the people who directly voted for him were. Does that make sense?
I think I understand how you're trying to argue it. It feels it feels very like indirect in some way. Like I feel like it
You're
would.
indirectly like being born into a society where you have all these expectations in the first place, right?
Yeah, but I think like again, like in this case, we're already like part of society. So we already agreed like okay, we're going to participate. We're taking advantage of the things that society provides, and we expect that society provides the moral considerations for other people in society towards us, and we would then be expected to contribute like our part essentially towards the society. So given that that's the case, so conditionally speaking, like we've entered that case, the following question is kind of like whether or not the operation in which we handle the contributions, whether or not that is moral. And I think what you were saying earlier is that the ability to vote kind of says like, yes, it has to be because I have some amount of control over, like it feels sufficient enough for you to not think it's immoral. That voting is sufficient in terms of your ability to influence decisions. And the thing I'm trying to get at is whether
I'm
or
sorry.
not. Go
To
ahead.
be clear, the indirect influence I find to be much more valuable than the voting.
Like
Like
the
I feel like
ability
my
for me
ability to have
to
this
start a
conversation
campaign or
with you,
something.
I feel like the fact that you and I can have this conversation openly in public and that we can record it and put it on YouTube and other people can stumble upon it and possibly come around to my way of seeing things gives me dramatically more power than my vote does.
So would you? So, okay, how about this? What if freedom of speech didn't exist in the country? Would you then consider it immoral?
It really depends on the country. It depends on the society. I think that there are societies in which freedom of speech is probably not a good idea
And like, I
to
mean,
the
just like
degree.
pretend like there's this abstract government that's like otherwise very similar to the United States. If you removed freedom of speech
Hmm.
from the like societal considerations for each other, like what people would consider moral, if you took that out and now you just had like a democratic process in terms of deciding how to spend money that is collected through taxes, now your the sort of like leverage that you had previously is gone, and the same sort of decision you have to confront the same sort of decision, which is whether or not these sort of group decisions, which are oftentimes just stupid, like they come from places that are not well informed or whatever, right? You're now being forced to take responsibility through payment for these decisions that like you definitely don't agree with. Do you still feel like it would be considered moral in this sort of society?
I would say the calculus remains the same. It's like if you don't like the direction society is moving in, or if you don't like the status quo, then you exert influence in the most effective way you can, or the
But in
way
this
that.
society, you're only allowed to vote. You can't
Uh,
like tell other people like, hey, this is actually a really stupid idea. You can't like, there's no broadcasts going like, this is the reason why this is a stupid idea or not a stupid idea.
I guess it depends on how the society came to a place where they're not allowed to talk about these things.
Just pretend like it just started that way and this is like how it works. It's otherwise the exact same as the United States. Like if you had no ability to influence, say, me or other people or your audience, and
Hmm.
now you're subjected to the same conundrum of taking responsibility for decisions that are made by a potentially very stupid or uninformed majority, do you feel that that is moral?
I'm trying really hard to engage with this hypothetical, but I feel like I feel like that society has so many other things that are different as a result of this that I would have to completely alter like my structure here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's not like I see that there's a lot of I see that there can be a lot of kind of points that you would need to think through. But at a gut reaction, do you feel like
The gut reaction is no, it's not immoral.
it's still moral for you? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So, like when I think of, so I guess let me tell you kind of like my baseline here is that like if we all have the same expectations of each other, then and we're all meeting those expectations, then we're all being moral, right? But if I expect something of you and you expect something of me and I hold up my end of the bargain and you don't, you're breaking the social contract. You're acting in an immoral way.
I think morality goes a little bit deeper than that.
Right. It goes way deeper than that, but that's like I said, kind of like the
Or I
baseline.
mean like more fundamental. Like for me morality is kind of about like this sort of like feeling. It's like your underlying like truth or the like reality behind how you feel about things. And it's separate, for example, from like the distinction I make is with ethics, for example. I think of ethics almost more like the science, and then morals as kind of reality. And do you kind of see what I mean? Like, it's not so much about like social contracts or this type of stuff. It's more so just like you as an individual. What do you feel? Like, what's your, if I punch somebody in the face, do you feel like that would be a good or bad thing? If I aborted a child, do you feel that would be a good or bad thing? And then the goal is to turn those feelings into like phrases and sentences and statements.
Right. And I think that's what I'm trying to do. So like when I say, if we're upholding the social contract and we're being moral generally, I think that's what I'm doing there.
And you feel like you would still feel like it's fine that in the society where you can only influence the decision making process through voting, and you don't have any ability to like go on Twitch or stream or do anything like this, that being subjected to the decisions of like a potentially very stupid majority is still like actually okay. Like you still feel like that's morally fine for you.
As long as everyone else is playing by the same rules, then yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I
Okay.
wouldn't like that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I feel like I feel like if I were to answer my question myself, I also feel like it's fine. But the reason for this is because I think that voting is like a sufficient like influence to have. And there's this other thing, I guess, in our current society, which is that there exists a layer of separation between like the pure democracy and like what actually happens. We're not voting on every single decision. We're voting on people that then like they themselves make decisions. I have faith in like those people. So this is for me why like in like a United States system, I think it's okay. But in the hypothetical that I gave, it's definitely I feel like a little bit harder.
Yeah. So yeah, we have what's called a representative democracy. So we basically elect people to make the decisions, but the expectation is that they make the decisions based on the will of their constituents, and they can't always poll or gauge opinion on literally everything. And sometimes they have to do things that are kind of against public opinion because they're operating on information that we don't have, or also like they're professionals in their field, and there's some sort of expectation that that they're capable of making better decisions for us than we are of ourselves sometimes. And then there's a system of like direct democracy, which doesn't exist anywhere on earth at this point, and probably never actually did, where people are actually, there's like a referendum for every decision made in the society, right? Where everybody has to vote on literally everything, or you're basically voting by not voting too. So yeah, I think representative democracy has its flaws, but I would say that those flaws are not as serious as the flaws created by direct democracy.
So one of the aspects of taxation is that in terms of like making a decision as to whether or not you want to participate in society, is that the government or like society kind of collectively owns the land in which like a country is defined over. Do you feel that it is okay for a government to own that land and be able to make or enforce policies like, if you exist in our land, you have to abide by certain things, like we keep track of you, and thus, if you make money, you have to pay us. Do you feel like that's morally okay?
Yeah, I feel like we kind of, unless I'm misunderstanding, you're kind of like rephrasing a question we've already asked, right? Like, is the fact that does the fact that we can't consent to being born mean that we're necessarily being subject to injustice?
Oh, no. So the what I'm trying to get at here is kind of more about the nature of like ownership. So let's say you're born and now I'm like participating in society. some of the things that allow the government to say like tax your property or tax, I don't know, I'm sure there's a bunch of things that can be taxed,
Sure.
deals with like the fact that the government, like for example with property tax, the government owns, society owns, I guess, the like total boundary of the country. And if you exist on like some plot of land in that, the boundary of that country, you're kind of expected, like if you own the house and the property, even though you own the house and the property, you're still expected to pay some tax to the government despite like you technically owning that land. Do you feel like the government and I guess like as an extension, like society as a whole, it should have the ability to like say own land in that method and then also enforce payment in that way? Like you could argue, no, I don't think the government should be allowed to own land in a way that like would allow it to tax me just by existing on the land. Or you could say like I don't believe the government should be able to tax me for paving roads that I then have to use, for example, because that's just like space. Like they're owning space. They're trying to make me pay for space. Like maybe that you could consider that like immoral in some way.
So I'll do the easy part first. So the idea of being taxed in order to maintain roads, I think, is like a no-brainer, absolute thing that you're just going to have to accept whether you like it or not. But it's not about the space that's being taxed. It's about the labor of the people who are paving the roads.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be compensated for that, as well as the materials used to pave the roads, right? So yeah, I think being expected to contribute to that in some way is beyond reasonable. As far as property taxes, I actually really don't like property taxes. Are they immoral? I suppose that knowing that you're going to have to pay property taxes and then buying property in an area where you have to pay property taxes, um, you're consenting to it. It's like if you're consenting to it, I don't really see how it's immoral.
Well, you're kind of like,
Especially considering you have alternatives. There are states where you don't have property tax. So if that like really is a hair up your ass, just move to one of those states.
okay. So I guess the existence of alternate options would make you feel that it's okay. Do
Yeah,
you,
because you are consenting to it if you're paying it.
so then in that case, like you do feel that it's okay for the government to like own the land, like the country of the land essentially, and like make people pay
Right.
for existing on this land.
Well, I don't think that they don't own your. I mean, maybe technically because they ultimately can pull it out from underneath you. I guess I would have to agree that whether they like legally technically own it or not, they like kind of fundamentally do, right? Um,
Yeah, like insofar as they could send like the, I don't know, the army or whatever and force you out.
yeah, I think that's fine. I just I would say it's moral simply because I don't see why anybody would feel like an expectation that they could permanently, without any sort of effort or further justification other than I paid for it or I was here first, own something forever. Like a part of the social contract that we have in America is that like, if you own property and you follow the rules, you hold up your end of the deal, then you have an expectation that we will help you secure your property and maintain your property. Like if somebody like breaks in your house, you have an expectation that you're allowed to defend yourself. You have an expectation that if somebody steals something from you, the police will try and help you investigate it and recoup things and shit like this. So, um,
So even in the case that like
yeah.
governments owning land like almost exhaustively, I don't know if there's any like livable land in the world that isn't under control of a government. Um, you feel that that's fine, that like they're able to they're able to possess like all of the space, give you no options to decide otherwise, and then also like on the terms of their ownership is that they're morally in the right to charge you for existing on their space and also like kick you out and or like just kidnap you, put you in jail, do whatever they want essentially.
The alternative is that you're living in a power vacuum where you have no expectation of anything being respected, and you just live on the land, and somebody's allowed to just come in and kill you and take it. So yeah, it's moral.
Or what if there's like an alternative where the government can't tax you for like owning land maybe. So let's say you live in the country, you're a citizen of the country, you're able to purchase land, and the government isn't able to tax you for that land.
I think that's ideal, and as I said before, there are at least two states in America where that's the case. And if that's the thing that you want to, or if that's the hill you want to die on, then move to one of those states. I don't like it, but do I think it's necessarily a moral no? Because I think the alternatives are dramatically worse, and I can't envision a system in which we can secure somebody's rights without also expecting them to contribute to society.
Yeah, but like maybe they could contribute. This is like a super not well thought out point, so I'm kind of tripping over myself a little bit here. But like maybe you could
Same here.
think of a situation where the government, like they're able to. So let's say like any publicly owned space, parks, roads, libraries, whatever. Right in these places, you still pay taxes for the maintenance of these things, and the police like they're still responsible for maintaining the safety and whatever in these public spaces. But if you own property, you can choose not to pay taxes for your direct property, and if that happens, like the police like aren't expected to, like let's say there's a domestic crime on your property, the police are not expected to go into your property to do anything unless the like property or unless the altercation or whatever seeps out into a public space. Like a system like that could exist. Do you think that that would be worse than the current system? Like you said that the alternatives are like worse, like this would be an alternative. Do you think that that would be worse?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. I'm not sure if I'm understanding really this hypothetical. Can you try and condense it a bit, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So in this hypothetical, what would happen is the government gives you an option that on if you own property within the boundaries of a country,
Okay.
you can choose whether or not you want the. So normally, for example, if you own property in a country, there are certain services that are afforded, maybe that would justify property tax. Like, for example, the police would come, maybe firefighters would come. There's a bunch of stuff like.
You can like opt into society, basically.
Yeah, like.
You can say
But,
whether or not you want to exist on your own domain.
yeah, kind of like at the in terms of like what it would entail for like the government to own the land of the country's boundaries in relation to its citizens. Maybe there's an alternative that would be the nature of the government's ownership of this land is that they can't just like force you to be a part of the system, but they could say like, okay, if you don't, we don't send you firefighters, we don't send you police, we don't, I don't know, like maybe water or something, like we don't maintain the pipes that go into your house, we don't do whatever, right? Like those are on you, but you can make that decision yourself. So you could pay property taxes, and in which case, like then you could expect that the government would send like all the things I just listed. Do you feel like that would be a worse alternative? Because you said that the alternatives are worse.
Yeah, I think this would be way worse for a number of reasons. So first and foremost, you're engaging with society whenever you're engaging with the government. You're engaging with all these social services whenever you're opting out of them, right? You're
No,
basically
no, no.
saying,
You're only not engaging with them on your land. So
yeah,
you
but
would still
they,
pay
they have to keep
taxes
some
for
sort of
other
record that
things.
so and so lives here and so doesn't want to contribute to these things, and so has no expectation of us taking care of their stuff if something goes wrong.
No, no, like so
So
you would
like,
still pay taxes in other ways. For example,
uh-huh.
you would pay taxes for paving the roads. You'd still pay taxes for public schools. You'd still pay taxes for like libraries, whatever. But you wouldn't have to pay taxes. Like I'm trying to like make this a little bit more specific. So maybe there's like a bigger point here about like abstract nature of ownership or something. But I can't really think at that level right now. So let's just focus on this property thing. Just the property tax, right? You go
Mhm.
like, okay, I I
So
will
if
pay
it's just the
taxes for other
property
things, but I
tax,
choose
I,
not.
I'm going to revert to the previous thing though, and just say if that's what you want, go move to like Virginia. I think is one of the states where there's no property tax. Just move to Virginia.
But and you think that this would be worse, like than just everybody paying property tax?
I would say okay. So the states that don't have property tax, I'm completely assuming this next point. I'm assuming the states that don't have property tax have other ways of raising revenue
Yeah, like income
that
tax and other
is
stuff. Yeah, sure.
compensating for that. Yeah, like maybe they have a higher income tax, for example. Sure. So, yeah, I would say like if you don't want to contribute in this way, then go to a place where you're not expected to. But otherwise, understand that like this money is being used for other things. And also, like chances are, whoever we're talking about here lives in a neighborhood because most people don't live out in the middle of nowhere. And I think your neighbors have an expectation that they don't have like a house burning to embers beside their house, and they don't have to like inhale the smoke of your house burning down, right? So they also have an expectation that the fire department is putting the fire out if you have a fire.
Oh, that's a good
They
point.
they also are like sharing pipes with you, like the you know the water pipes, and they're also getting electricity from the same pole as you. So like if you don't want to be on that grid or whatever, and you want to have your own electricity, um, you know, say you want to create your own like internet node or something instead of having to take it from the same node that everyone else is taking from. Like you can do all of these things, but you're necessarily like causing everybody else's prices to go up. You're necessarily causing, um, you know, you're introducing variables where they don't need to exist. So you're being like an arbitrary sort of contrarian at this point. You're being a curmudgeon. You're being antisocial. You're breaking the social contract by trying to do these things.
Right. I guess like you could say you could argue that it feels morally worse because
You're trying to carte blanche pick and choose what parts of society you want to engage in and contribute to. And I think the more money you have, uh, the more the more freedom you have to actually make these sorts of decisions. So
sure.
I think that
But
if
I
you
think
really
like the
want to
key thing
live,
here in terms of morals is that like without 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 the ability to hold somebody accountable, but simultaneously being subjected to negative outcomes of their decision making makes it so that this would be a less moral system, and that the idea of like ownership here, like if you exist in a country and you own property, for example, in this country, that you should be expected to contribute to the country, like from a property perspective, and that the government is morally okay to own the land in that way. Okay.
the government predates you, and it will continue to exist after you pass away. So I
Right.
mean, do you think that like when you die, uh, you know, the land that you owned should stay in your name and belong to you forever? Or if not, like who regulates that? Who decides who gets it next, or what's done with it?
I think generally like this is done through wills, right?
Mm-hmm. And enforced by
By
who
the
or
government,
what?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like ultimately
But
by the government. Like all the legal stuff is ultimately enforced by the government. So, okay. I don't. I feel like I can't really push anymore here.
yeah.
Okay.
And really also like, and I think really the main point here, fundamentally, when it comes to just the whole idea of libertarianism is like, I don't feel like I should have to do blank, or I feel like taxation is theft, or I feel like imposing blank on me is an injustice. And I would say it's totally fine to feel that way. Go live in the vacuum that you want to live in. But if you want to live in society, then you have to accept that the things, these decisions that you want to make for yourself are like just fundamentally ridiculous, because you're saying that I shouldn't have to suffer the negative consequences of society, yet society should have to suffer the negative consequence of you, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I think I agree with that. Like I ultimately am on your side. I think on this as well. I think the other aspect of this that you touched on earlier, which is pretty key, is that if you remove yourself from the moral consideration that society gives to its own members, you should also be okay then, morally speaking, with the societies like doing whatever they want to you, and that you shouldn't feel that that's like a moral wrong, which I think is that's like a really hard thing to defend, or it feels
Hmm.
really hard to defend. I
I would actually
really,
change one piece of that. I wouldn't say you shouldn't. I would say your feelings are irrelevant.
yeah, sure. I mean that I guess you could say shouldn't in yeah, I guess you could back shouldn't in a different way, but I would say
Yeah.
that is shouldn't. The thing is, I really wish I had a chance to listen to the other guy's argument, because he apparently he thought about this a lot. So, and he was really confident to argue this. So, I'd be
So
very curious
confident he
to
couldn't
hear.
show up for the debate.
True, you'd have to actually show up, yeah, of course, or he'd have to actually show up, of course. But I would be really curious to hear what that person had thought up of. So, okay, let me just add this timestamp. Thank you for engaging with these topics.
Always.